I live in a very rural area in Tennessee, and this happened either in the summer of '92 or '93 when I was a preteen. I can still see it in my mind like it happened yesterday. As I said before, it was a rural area in Tennessee where we used to have serious issues with people dumping unwanted, worn-out items and garbage down our beautiful hillsides and ravines. At that time, it was common to find illegal dumping sites everywhere because there was no bulk pickup offered by our one waste disposal monopoly. In this part of the state, the economic disparity is obvious. You have some of the poorest people and some with multiple mansions and vacation homes. My family fell somewhere in the upper middle class. Think Titanic. We would be in either the lowest rung of first class or the very top of second class. Unfortunately, the majority would be in steerage or the coal bunker. Well, it was August in Tennessee, aka sun-scorching heat and enough humidity to make it slightly uncomfortable to breathe. Many describe it as the swamp-ass capital of the state. Anyway, we had just had an extraordinarily rare murder in our county. It was all that anyone was talking about. It was all you heard in our churches and beauty salons. The victim was largely unknown, a woman in her early 30s and nowhere near wealthy. I didn't know her, nor did anyone else. She had moved here less than a year ago and kept to herself and had not been reported missing. Then, just before our summer break came to an end, this lady was found at the base of a steep incline, deep in one of our densely wooded areas, by some folks out for a nature hike. She was found at the base of a large illegal dump on a winding dirt road that was barely wide enough for one vehicle. If you met another car, one of you would have to pull over so far you were almost off the road entirely. Even creepier? The road was named Bone Road. When she was found, she had lost everything from the neck up, but both her upper and lower body were recovered. Her killer had not been caught. So my mom was born and raised here and was of strong yet goofy stock. She has always been my best buddy, even when dropping the hammer on my brother and me. She was loved by every student she had ever taught. Our friends adored my goofy mama, often telling me how lucky I was to have her. My dad was a pharmacist in our area, smarter than most, and happy to fill a lost or forgotten prescription even late into the night. My dad isn't from here, but is very well known because of his job. Everyone knows my mama because she and most of our huge family have been here since our ancestors settled in the 1800s. The rest of her family lived in Middle Tennessee. On that day in August, we had been at a family reunion picnic at the beautiful, naturally made lake we lived near. Suddenly, a scattered thunderstorm popped up and brought our get-together to an end. It was just me and my mom, but on the ride home, we decided we were Sherlock Holmes and Watson. We wanted to see the crime scene. I know, brilliant. My dad was at work, and my brother was with a friend. This was '92 or '93, so no GPS, Alexa, Siri, or Google Earth, not even MapQuest. My dad was on our school board and had been given a highly detailed map of our entire county. Since neither of us knew how to reach Bone Road, we agreed the map would be our guide. We went home, grabbed the map, and set out like we were Magellan. We eventually found the place and headed to the spot. Being the ignorant rubberneckers we were, we just planned to drive past this stupid dump site. I can't explain how creepy this place was. A murder dump in the middle of BFE, on a road that started with blacktop, transitioned to gravel, and then good old dirt. It was mid-afternoon, but the sudden rain on the August ground made the area steamy. Literal steam was emanating from the road, the fields, the woods, everywhere. That just added to the thrill of our folly. As we approached the location, there was a blind curve, making it impossible to see the place until you were right up on it. When we rounded that corner, we saw we were not alone. A very dirty man had his very dirty truck pulled over at the dump, just far enough to allow us to pass. Sure, Joe Dirt could have been just another looky-loo like us, but he gave off a creepy vibe, just standing by his truck, looking down into the dump. He wasn't a sheriff's officer. We knew all our local authorities, and they had cleared the location a day or so before. Anyone could access the area. As we squeezed past his truck, he was standing on the passenger side of our car. I'm 12 or 13, I can't drive, so he was on my side as we passed, so close to him I could see his 2 teeth clear as day. He just smiled in this uber-creeptastic, almost leering way. Not nice, not friendly. We got past and thanked the Lord that Mr. Two-Tooth hadn't followed us. We agreed we would reach the end of Bone Road and get the hell out of there. We reached the end of Bone Road, which ended at a field. Bone Road was a dead end. My mom said the words I had been screaming in my head. Oh fuck. We had no choice. We had to do a 5-point turn and go back from where we came. Oh, I bet he's gone now. My mom's feeble attempt to soothe us both. Guess what? He was still there. Still smiling his huge two-tooth smile. Now, as my adult self reflects on this, he could have come after us, knowing we would be cornered, but neither of us has ever been accused of being too rational. We made it out unscathed, of course, and my dad hit the roof when he heard the tapestry of idiocy our afternoon adventure was. But you know, there's always a but. Days later, our newspaper heralded the good news. The murderer was caught. The woman had been killed by a boyfriend turned stalker. She had moved here from a town about 45 minutes away to get away from him, but he found her. He just drove around with her body in his truck before happening on the dump. Happily ever after? No. As we stared down at this guy's mugshot, it was real. Mr. Two-Tooth was her killer. We never told my dad that part. Mr. Two-Tooth was convicted of first-degree murder and abuse of a corpse. He will die in the state prison system, serving life with no parole. This story takes place in August of 2013, in the mountains of southern Oregon. I am a USAF Security Forces airman, military policeman. My girlfriend was at work, and as a swelteringly hot day began to turn into thunderstorms, my buddy Nick and I decided to explore some back roads and get out of the heat in town. Southern Oregon is crisscrossed with logging roads, some actively used and many totally forgotten and overgrown. Nick and I spent many of our days off starting on roads that we knew, finding roads we didn't know, driving for hours into the mountains, and eventually navigating back to paved roads. On this particular day, with storm clouds building over the mountains, we set off on a road we had never been on and began the drive into the mountains. After driving for around an hour, we hadn't seen or heard any signs of other people in the woods. We rounded a bend in the thick fir woods and emerged in a meadow that was totally surrounded by thick aspen groves. The meadow was perfectly flat and eerily still. We both noticed the strange stillness almost immediately. No birds, hardly any insect noise, no squirrels, and certainly no other people. On the far side of the meadow, right at the edge of the tree line, there was a picnic table. The table was very odd, however. It was painted a bright orange and was much larger than a typical picnic table in a park. Remarking on this, Nick drove through the meadow to get a closer look. I remember being apprehensive as we approached. The whole scenario was exceptionally strange. The overall silence of the aspen grove was unsettling. Also, it was nearly impossible to see far into the trees as aspens grow extremely close together. When we parked by the table, I hopped out of the passenger seat of the truck to check it out. I'm not very tall, only about 5'5", but the table was ridiculously oversized and practically unusable. The seats were nearly at chest level, meaning I would have to climb up to even sit on them. As I was looking at the table, Nick called me over to the truck, and I noticed he was looking back into the aspens. At first, I couldn't see what he was looking at, but then I noticed a splash of color that was completely out of place in the thick trees. A small one-man tent was set back in the trees, about 50 feet from the strange table. I had an initial feeling of dread and felt certain that there was someone in the tent. And if we could see the tent, they could see us. There were no campgrounds in this area, no people, no main roads for miles. Surely someone camping so remotely would be, at the very least, a strange person. However, as we observed the tent, we didn't see any movement or hear any sounds coming from it. Nick suggested I call out. I didn't want to, but I did. "Hey, anyone in there?" I yelled. No reply. Feeling completely on edge, Nick and I thought about driving away and leaving this strange area. But we began to fear the worst. What if there was a body in the tent? What if somebody had gotten kidnapped? Foolish, I know, but we thought it all the same. After some debate, we decided to have Nick turn the truck around to drive away from the camp. Should we need to leave in a hurry, he would be waiting behind the wheel. With my heart pounding, I started walking through the trees towards the tent. I was totally keyed up with my senses on full alert. When I reached the campsite, several things struck me as odd. Backpacks were scattered all over. No fire had been built and no wood collected. The tent was literally full of backpacks and women's clothing. Full of dread, I turned to leave and tell Nick what I had seen. As I left, I heard Nick start yelling, "Let's go! Let's get the fuck out of here!" Not knowing why he was yelling, I ran back to the truck. When I broke out of the trees, I saw a beat-up old Ford Taurus on the road, blocking us from leaving the meadow. I immediately leapt into the passenger seat, and Nick floored the gas pedal. The car was occupied by 2 men. A third person was lying against the window in the back. As we drove across the meadow, the driver attempted to block us from the road, but Nick drove around them and accelerated the way we had come. I looked back and saw the car attempting to turn around on the narrow road. Nick drove like a madman, and though I was honestly terrified that they would catch up, we hit the highway without seeing the car again. I still do not know if the person in the back was male or female. I called the state police, and they promised to send a trooper out to check out the scene. However, I received a call the next day from a trooper stating that the campsite, the backpacks, and the women's clothing were all gone, though he could tell people had been in the area. The strange table was still by the thick aspen grove. I have not returned to the area and do not intend to. I went camping with 3 of my buddies, John, Bennett, and Kyle. We do this every year, kind of a bro trip to reconnect with each other. We were all fresh out of college and decided to go on our yearly camping trip in August. We are from Oregon and ended up camping in the woods there, like we usually do, at the same spot. The first day was great. We set up our spot, explored the area, and by the time the sun was setting, we set up a campfire and made dinner. After a few too many beers and some s'mores, we decided to go to sleep. It was a perfect end to a perfect day. Our second day was basically the same thing. Hiking, food, 1 too many beers, but this night ended up being not so perfect. I remember watching a Mr. Nightmare video about some guys camping and hearing laughing, which turned out not to be from anyone in their group. Yeah, my story is similar. As we finished the rest of the beers, we were wrestling around with each other like guys do, when John suddenly stopped messing around and froze. Everyone was confused, but John claimed he heard something nearby. I told him it was most likely a squirrel, and he said, "No, it was most definitely not." He was scaring me at this point, so I decided to resume the tackling session and took him down. We forgot about the whole thing until about 10 minutes later. We were tired from wrestling and joking around, so we decided to put out the fire and head into the tent. We had a 6-person tent, for anyone wondering, so we were all in one tent. Just as our only light source, besides our flashlights, went out, I heard a slight cackle. I assumed it was one of the boys, because we were all clearly a bit buzzed, so everything was funny. I wanted to see what was so funny, so I turned the flashlight directly onto Bennett's face. I thought he was the one laughing. Bennett's face was as white as a ghost. He looked at me and said, "Did you guys hear that?" I said, "The laughing?" And Kyle said, "That wasn't you?" We were all shaken and decided to go into the tent. As we got into the tent, I pulled out an axe that I used to cut the wood. It was the only source of protection we had. I was on the very end of the tent, with Kyle and John in the middle and Bennett on the other end. We were all silent, but I knew we were all wide awake after hearing the laughing. We weren't exactly at an actual campsite where there were other people around. We just walked into the woods, found an open spot, and set up camp there. We were about a mile from our car with barely any cell signal, so I guess you could say we weren't exactly in the safest position if there was a crazy maniac running around. I got tired and dozed off. I have no idea how long I was sleeping before I heard the laughing again. It's hard to describe, other than it sounded menacing. I was frozen. I didn't move. I didn't even try to look over to see if my buddies were awake. The axe was under my pillow. As I mustered up the strength to move to get the axe, I saw what looked like someone's finger pressed up against the tent, just circling around the tent. Someone was definitely outside, walking around our tent, laughing. When they got to the front part of the tent where the entrance was, they stopped. About 5 seconds went by before the person ferociously shook the tent and screamed, "Bugatti, Bugatti." That's when I knew my buddies were awake as well, because Kyle screamed like a little girl. After he screamed, whoever was behind the tent laughed again and walked off. We laid there the rest of the night, wide awake and definitely sober. We didn't want to move out of pure fear that whoever was out there was still there. When the sun came up, we packed up everything and walked back to our car. We still go camping every year, but make sure to go to a legit camping site. I now bring a gun with me, and not just an axe. Whoever was outside our campsite could have been a deranged homeless person, a psychopath serial killer, a meth head, or just an asshole playing a prank on us. But I sure as hell won't camp in a rural place anymore. So this encounter occurred in August of 2009 while I was away on a student exchange to Japan. At the time, I was 14 years old and had only been in Japan for less than a month, or maybe 3 weeks or so, and therefore my Japanese was not good, as in I could say next to nothing, except my name, age, etc. So it was probably about 9 in the morning, and I was on my way to the Student Exchange Association's headquarters for some reason or another. Since both my homestay parents were at work already, by this time I was just going to bike to the place because it was probably only about a 20-minute ride. For this story to make sense, keep in mind that in Japan, they drive on the left side of the road instead of the right. So I was biking on the right side of a not-so-busy road when an oncoming white car began to slow down and pull over near me. I remember kind of glancing over into the car and noticing this guy just gawking at me, like jaw-to-the-floor slow drive-by type deal. Me being an extremely pale, very ash-blonde girl. I had been getting tons of attention about my appearance in my short time in Japan, though, so I thought nothing of it really. Until this guy did a tire-screeching U-turn behind me and pulled up to an intersection where I was waiting to cross the road, now right in front of him. I uneasily tried to avoid eye contact with him as I crossed, because I could feel him staring hard at me the whole time. However, now I was on a big, busy stretch of road that is pretty long, and my destination was at the end on the left. So this time, I was biking on the left side of the road, traveling with cars going the same way. I figured I'd be fine on the main drag of town, but when the white car started to slowly drive along level with me, I remember starting to feel pretty uneasy. The man in the car starts calling out to me while still driving alongside me, and finally I look over at him and pull over, being the idiot child that I was. In the car was a relatively good-looking young man in a suit, and I was taken aback by the fact that it was not a creepy old man following me. Stupidly, I felt more relaxed. He tried to ask me some questions in Japanese at first, but I just shook my head. So then he tried broken English. He asked me where I was going, and again, stupidly, I just gestured ahead. He made some more comments I couldn't really understand, about my hair and stuff, gesturing for me to come closer, and not really understanding and trying to be polite. I got closer. Finally, when I was about 3 feet from him, he asks me a muffled question, which I can't really hear. So I get a bit closer again to hear him, and I realize he is simply asking, sex. I am immediately taken aback and shrink away from him, and my child face of shock and horror, accompanied by my loud, adamant exclamation of "No!" must have caused him to bugger off because he peeled right on out of there. Mind you, the whole time during this awkward face-to-face conversation we had been on a very busy road, so I don't know what he was thinking was going to happen, that I was just going to leave my bike there on the road and get in his car with my Dora Explorer backpack. I have so many other creepy experiences like this from my trip, mostly with men asking me to get in their cars and stuff, but this experience was the worst because I had only been there for maybe 3 weeks and was really shaken. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it really wasn't, because a similar man in a similar car approached the other exchange student girl in my program months later, also asking her creepy questions and trying to get her in his car.